For most of the 20th century, if something broke on your car, you opened the hood and fixed it. Brake pads got swapped in the driveway. Carburetors got rebuilt on a Saturday afternoon, without permission from the manufacturer, without a software license, and without a lawyer. But somewhere between the carburetor and the touchscreen, something changed. Today, a mechanic plugging a diagnostic scanner into your engine bay might technically be violating federal copyright law. How did fixing your own car become a legal minefield? It starts, oddly enough, with a law that was written to stop music piracy. It was 1908, and the Ford Model T had just rolled off the assembly line in Detroit. Henry Ford wanted a car that farmers could maintain with basic hand tools in a dirt floor barn, and that is almost exactly what he's built. Owners swapped engines, fabricated replacement parts from scrap metal, and even converted their Model Ts into homemade tractors using aftermarket kits sold through the mail. That culture of owner repair did not just survive the Model T era, it thrived. By the 1950s and 1960s, the shade tree mechanic was an American institution. Fathers taught sons how to change brake pads in the driveway. Neighborhood garages hummed on weekends with the sound of ratchets and the smell of motor oil. An entire industry of independent repair shops, parts stores, and aftermarket suppliers grew up around the idea that once you bought a car, it was yours to maintain however you saw fit. And for a long time, the manufacturers did not fight that. The aftermarket parts industry grew into a massive economic force. Today, it accounts for over $400 billion a year in the United States alone, supporting more than 500,000 businesses. But here is a detail worth noting. Even in the early days, there were signs of where this was heading. Starting in the 19-teens, Ford established a network of certified dealerships and authorized service centers. The goal was to promote Ford-manufactured replacement parts over the components coming out of independent machine shops. Ford pushed for standardized pricing among its certified repair facilities, creating a system that steered customers toward the factory ecosystem. It worked for Ford. And decades later, General Motors executive Alfred Sloan took the concept further, building planned obsolescence into the product cycle to keep customers coming back. The seeds of manufacturer-controlled repair were planted long before any computer entered the picture. So why did it take 100 years for this tension to explode into a national fight? Because the car was changing underneath all of that. The shift began quietly in the late 1980s. In 1988, the Society of Automotive Engineers issued a recommendation calling for standardized onboard diagnostics across the industry. It was a practical idea. Cars were getting more complex, and California wanted a reliable way to test vehicle emissions across every make and model. By 1991, California required all new vehicles to have some form of onboard diagnostics. The first version was called OB1. Then in 1996, the real transformation arrived. California mandated that every new car sold in the state must carry a standardized diagnostic port called OBD2. The federal government followed suit, and overnight, every car on every dealer lot in America became a rolling computer. Under the hood, electronic control units replaced many of the mechanical systems that shade tree mechanics had worked on for decades. Brakes, ignition, airbags, steering mechanisms, all of them now answered to software. For a while, this was actually good news for independent repair shops. The OBD2 port was standardized. Any mechanic with a scan tool could plug in, read the diagnostic trouble codes, and figure out what was wrong. The playing field was level. Dealerships had no monopoly on the information. But here's where the story takes its turn. In 1998, Congress passed the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. The law was designed primarily to protect the entertainment industry from digital piracy. It made it illegal to circumvent technological protection measures, the digital locks on discs sitting in store displays, on music files downloaded to desktop computers, and on streaming services running through living room televisions. Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act was the key provision, and it was sweeping. If a company put a digital lock on the software running inside a disk player or a desktop computer, breaking that lock was a federal offense, regardless of why you did it. Nobody in 1998 was thinking about cars when they wrote that law. But here is the problem. By the early 2000s, cars ran on copyrighted software. The code in your engine control unit, your transmission module, your airbag system, all of it was protected intellectual property. And under the DMCA, accessing or modifying that software without authorization could technically be treated as a copyright violation. The implications crept in slowly. Independent repair shops started noticing that they could not access certain diagnostic functions without manufacturer-specific tools. Car companies began encrypting their diagnostic data, and the DMCA gave them legal cover to do it. If a mechanic bypassed those digital protections to read your car's computer, they might be breaking federal law. Not because they were stealing anything and not because they were pirating a movie. A copyright statute written for the entertainment industry had been stretched to cover the engine bay of a Honda Accord. But the story on the ground was even worse than the legal theory suggested. A 2005 survey conducted by the Terrence Group found that 59% of independent repair shops reported problems getting access to repair information or the tools they needed. 2 out of 3 shops said they had been forced to send vehicles back to the dealership because they lacked the diagnostic access to finish the job. Meanwhile, the Federal Trade Commission received thousands of complaints about auto parts and repairs, though it noted only a handful specifically mentioned the inability to acquire diagnostic equipment. The disconnect was telling. Car owners felt the squeeze at the counter, but the paper trail had not caught up yet. What does it look like when your mechanic can see the check engine light, but cannot read the code behind it? It looks like a tow truck to the dealership and a bill that is 35% higher than it needed to be. In August 2001, Senator Paul Wellstone introduced the first Motor Vehicle Owners' Right to Repair Act in the United States Senate. The bill's stated goal was to end what it called the unfair monopoly of car manufacturers maintaining control over repair information. The bill did not pass. Neither did the versions introduced in New Jersey, Connecticut, Illinois, New York, Oklahoma, or Oregon in the years that followed. In 2002, the Automotive Service Association and representatives from major automakers reached a voluntary agreement in which manufacturers would provide independent repair shops with the same service and training information available to franchise dealerships. It sounded like a solution, but the agreement had no legal enforcement mechanism, and not all industry groups were party to it. The Coalition for Auto Repair Equality and the Automotive Aftermarket Industry Association both pointed out that without legislation, there was nothing compelling manufacturers to honor their commitments. The voluntary approach stumbled along for a decade. Then Massachusetts changed the game. In 2012, the Massachusetts State Legislature passed Right to Repair Bill H. 4362. It was the first law of its kind in the United States, and it required automakers to provide independent repair shops with the same diagnostic and repair information given to dealer service departments. Massachusetts voters overwhelmingly confirmed the measure at the ballot box that November, with 86% voting in favor. The industry took notice. By 2014, a group of automaker associations and aftermarket trade groups signed a nationwide memorandum of understanding that extended the principles of the Massachusetts law across all 50 states, effective with model year 2018 vehicles. For a moment, it looked like the problem was solved, but there was a loophole, and the manufacturers had already spotted it. The 2012 law and the 2014 memorandum covered data accessed through the physical OBD2 port under the dashboard. What they did not cover was telematics, the data transmitted wirelessly from the vehicle to the manufacturer's servers. And as cars grew more connected, More and more of the diagnostic information that mechanics needed was being routed through wireless telematics systems instead of through the physical port. Think about what that means. If your car sends its diagnostic data wirelessly to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer decides who gets to see that data, then the OBD2 port sitting under your dashboard becomes less and less useful. The information still exists. It is just no longer accessible at the point of repair. By 2021, roughly half of all new cars sold in the United States had connected telematics systems. By 2030, that number is projected to reach 95% of new vehicles rolling off assembly lines worldwide. The physical diagnostic port that leveled the playing field in 1996 was being quietly bypassed by a wireless pipeline that flowed in one direction, straight to the manufacturer. However, Massachusetts voters weren't going to accept that quietly. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. We cover the real stories behind the cars you drive every week, and there's a lot more to this one. Massachusetts went back to the ballot in 2020. Question 1 asked voters whether the state's right to repair law should be updated to include telematics data. The measure required manufacturers to install a standardized open data platform, starting with model year 2022, that would let vehicle owners and independent repair shops access wireless diagnostic data through a mobile application. Voters approved it with 75% support. What happened next caught everyone off guard. Rather than comply, Subaru and Kia simply disabled their telematics services for 2022 model year vehicles sold in Massachusetts. A Subaru senior executive said compliance was impossible because the open data platform required by the law did not exist yet. In practical terms, Massachusetts car buyers lost features like remote diagnostics and automatic crash notification because the manufacturers chose to shut everything down rather than share the data. But the manufacturers had another card to play, and this one came from Washington. In June 2023, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, weighed in. NHTSA sent letters to 22 automakers stating that the Massachusetts law conflicted with federal vehicle safety regulations. The agency argued that opening telematics data to third parties could create cybersecurity vulnerabilities, potentially allowing hackers to manipulate steering, braking, or airbag systems remotely. NHTSA effectively told manufacturers to ignore the state law that 75% of Massachusetts voters had approved. The cybersecurity argument deserves honest examination. It's not entirely without merit. In 2015, security researchers famously demonstrated that they could remotely hack a Jeep Cherokee through its cellular connection, taking control of the vehicle's steering and brakes. Chrysler recalled 1.4 million vehicles in response. The risk of remote vehicle hacking is real, and any system that opens wireless access to vehicle data needs robust security protocols. But critics of the manufacturer's position point out that the cybersecurity argument conveniently aligns with a financial incentive. Dealership service departments across the United States generated over $156 billion in service and parts revenue in 2024, writing more than 270 million repair orders. Dealership labor rates typically run 25 to 35% higher than independent shops, and OEM parts cost 30 to 50% more than aftermarket alternatives. When manufacturers control the flow of diagnostic data, they control who can competitively service the vehicle. The situation continued to evolve. In August 2023, NHTSA and Massachusetts reached a partial resolution, agreeing that manufacturers could comply with the state law by providing wireless data access through short-range Bluetooth connections rather than long-range remote access. This compromise would reduce the cybersecurity risk while still giving vehicle owners access to their own data. Meanwhile, the Federal Repair Act, introduced by Representative Neil Dunn, gained 50 bipartisan co-sponsors in the House. The bill would require manufacturers to provide vehicle owners and independent repair shops with the same diagnostic tools and data available to authorized dealerships, including real-time telematics information. It advanced through a House subcommittee but has not yet become law. However, the states were not waiting on Congress. 6 states have passed some form of right to repair legislation for vehicles. Colorado, New York, Minnesota, Maine, and California have all followed Massachusetts in various ways. Approximately 27 additional states have right to repair bills introduced or pending. In November 2023, Maine voters approved their own ballot initiative requiring standardized access to onboard diagnostic systems. There has been some progress on the federal copyright front, too. In 2015, the Librarian of Congress granted a DMCA exemption, allowing vehicle owners to circumvent the digital protections on their own car software for purposes of diagnosis, repair, or lawful modification. That exemption has been renewed every 3 years since, but it comes with a catch. The exemption applies to car owners, not to the tools or services that help them do the work. A mechanic who provides circumvention tools or services to customers could still face legal exposure under the DMCA anti-trafficking provisions. So the law says you can fix your own car software, but the market for tools to help you do it remains legally uncertain. Does that sound like a right you can actually exercise? The deeper pattern is worth stepping back to see. The history of car repair in America is a history of access. The Model T gave owners total access to every bolt and bearing. OBD2 gave mechanics universal access to diagnostic codes. And then, piece by piece, that access was rerouted through proprietary software, encrypted data streams, and copyright law. The Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act of 1975 already prohibits manufacturers from conditioning a warranty on the use of branded parts or authorized service providers. In other words, a dealer cannot legally void your warranty because you changed your own oil or used an aftermarket air filter. But enforcement has been inconsistent, and many car owners do not know their rights. The perception that independent repair voids the warranty continues to push consumers toward dealer service departments, even when it is not legally required. What makes this story unusual is that it did not happen through one dramatic law or one corporate decision. It happened gradually, through layers of software code in engine bays and legislation drafted in Capitol Hill offices that were rarely discussed together. A copyright law designed for the music industry, a diagnostic port that became less relevant as data went wireless, voluntary agreements that lacked teeth, federal agencies intervening to override state ballot measures that passed by landslide margins. The aftermarket repair industry, all $400 billion and 500,000 businesses of it, exists because Americans have always expected to choose how they maintain what they own. The independent mechanic down the street, the Saturday morning oil change in the driveway, the parts counter at the local auto store. These are not only businesses. They are a relationship between owners and their vehicles that stretches back over a century. Whether that relationship survives. The next decade depends on decisions being made right now in state legislatures, in federal agencies, and in the engineering departments of every major automaker. The car sitting in your driveway is more capable than anything your grandparents could have imagined. The question is whether it still belongs to you in the ways that matter most. That question does not have a simple answer, and it probably should not.